The world's first megacorporation didn't rise through brilliant ideas, fair competition, or smart business moves. It rose through total control, brutal force, and a license from the government that basically said, do whatever it takes. Way before we had stock exchanges, before anyone wrote corporate laws, before free trade was even a phrase people used, one company discovered something way more valuable than understanding markets. They figured out how to blend money with violence into a single powerful weapon and then sold shares of it to investors. Here's what most people think: capitalism just naturally happened. Markets slowly evolved from people trading goods, getting better and smarter as civilization advanced. That story feels good, but it's not the whole truth. Because the financial world we're living in right now, it didn't begin with freedom, it began with domination. And trust me, nothing is ever as straightforward as it seems. If you want to truly understand how modern capitalism actually operates, you need to go back to something that's probably sitting in your kitchen right now. Something you use without even thinking about it. Spices. Back in the late 1500s and early 1600s, spices weren't just things that made food taste better. They were economic power. Nutmeg, cloves, mace, cinnamon, these were how you kept food from rotting when fridges didn't exist, how you treated diseases before modern medicine, and how you showed everyone you had wealth and status. A small bag of nutmeg in Europe? Worth more than the same amount of gold. If you controlled the spice trade, you weren't just making money, you were literally reshaping entire economies. Here's the catch: geography. Almost every valuable spice on the planet came from one tiny group of islands in Southeast Asia. Control those islands, and you control the supply. Control the supply, and you set whatever price you want. Initially, European nations fought each other for this. Portuguese ships competed with Dutch ships. Traders slashed prices trying to beat each other. Profits swung wildly from one extreme to another. Some voyages came back loaded with wealth. Others came back with nothing but debt and dead crew members. The whole trade was risky, scattered, and incredibly inefficient. That unpredictability scared investors to death. But merchants? It terrified them even more. Every time one trader dumped tons of spices onto the market, prices crashed. When prices crashed, all the profit disappeared. Competition looked great on paper for customers. But for the people funding these dangerous ocean voyages, it was a complete disaster. So the Dutch did something radical, something that would permanently change how money and power work together. Instead of fighting each other, they joined forces. In 1602, the Dutch government took several competing trade companies and merged them into one massive entity. The Dutch East India Company, known as the VOC, on the surface it looked like a clever financial move. They sold shares to regular people. Investors could buy a piece of the company, spread out their risk, and even trade those shares without ever stepping foot on a ship. For the first time ever, everyday citizens could invest in overseas empire building. But that's not what made it revolutionary. The real game changer was what happened next. The Dutch government gave the VOC a complete monopoly over all trade east of the Cape of Good Hope. No other Dutch merchant could legally compete. No rival company could enter their territory. And here's where it gets wild. The VOC wasn't just allowed to do business. It was allowed to act like a government. It could start wars. It could build military fortresses. It could make official treaties. It could throw people in prison. It could execute anyone caught smuggling. This wasn't a company working within a country's rules. This was a company acting as the government itself, with stockholders making money from it all. Nothing screams free market quite like legally banning all your competitors. Once they had total monopoly power, making profit became brutally straightforward. Control the supply, limit how much gets sold, keep prices sky high. Anyone who challenged that system wasn't just competition. They were a threat to be eliminated. On islands like Banda, literally the only place on Earth, where nutmeg grew back then, the VOC enforced their control with military violence. Local people were told, "You sell only to us, at prices we decide." When they refused, there was no bargaining. There was destruction, entire villages burned to the ground. Whole populations slaughtered, the survivors either enslaved or kicked off their land, replaced by forced laborers brought in to keep production going. Even healthy nutmeg trees were deliberately destroyed. Not because they were diseased, but because having too much nutmeg was bad for profits. Scarcity wasn't a problem in their system. It was the system. Meanwhile, back in Amsterdam, investors saw absolutely none of this brutality, and they didn't need to. Their experience with the VOC was neat, organized, and purely financial. Steady dividend payments, share prices going up, perfectly balanced accounting books. All the violence stayed thousands of miles away overseas. The profits came straight home. And this separation, this distance between making money and facing consequences, might be the VOC's most lasting impact on economic history. For the first time ever, thousands of people could profit from imperial violence without being part of it, seeing it, or even admitting it existed. Risk became abstract, responsibility got watered down among thousands of shareholders. Ownership was just a piece of paper. By the time the money showed up in their accounts, all evidence of how it was made had been cleaned away. This was capitalism learning how to grow massive. The VOC didn't just trade spices. They created a system where brutality could be turned into investor returns, where military force could be converted into dividends, and where moral responsibility could be buried under mountains of paperwork and geographic distance. Investors didn't need to believe in conquest. They just needed to believe in profits. And for quite a while, it worked incredibly well.